Good morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock. This is hour number 23 in our 24-hour event marathon here. It's super exciting to have the panel on science podcasts. There's a huge need to communicate to general audiences what researchers are doing, what practitioners are doing, what experts are doing, and it's not always easy to understand it. So this second and third translation step is absolutely needed. We have an exciting set of panelists. It's Louise von Stechow from the BioRevolution podcast. We recently connected, and Louise, thanks so very much for coming in on a Sunday here morning. We have Allissa Dillman from the Common Fund Data Ecosystem, and that's a huge effort out of the National Institutes of Health. I think we will hear more about that. And we will have Jonathan Schwäbisch also joining. He is the podcast host for the Policy Viz event. And so it's super interesting to have three experts present from quite different vantage points, how they got to become science podcast moderators and hosts, how they pick their speakers, how they pick topics, but also what challenges and opportunities it brings when you are trying to bring science to a very large audience. So let me introduce the speakers. It's so wonderful to see you here. And again, for some of you, if you're in Europe, this is 6 hours later then. So thank you for joining us on a Sunday afternoon. Dr. Louise von Stechow, she analyzes trends of life sciences, and that's not easy. There is much development. There are many amazing people working on new technologies, new ways to understand life, to map life, to model life, and really trying to stay at that interface. The cutting edge, not the bleeding edge of life sciences, is absolutely demanding, but she is able to do this, and she brings experts from pharmaceutical research, but also biotechnology and health to the general audiences. And again, oftentimes it takes another step of translation. We researchers, me included, oftentimes manage to get one step of translation done, and then it gets to maybe experts from other fields and experts that work in slightly different areas but are still in the same field. But to really get it to my mom, to my children, that takes another step. And so we absolutely need that expertise and that ability to communicate. So I have been impressed to browse some of the podcasts that she has already run, and I think there will be a link to more podcasts in a moment. It's also interesting to see that her focus is, of course, on topics of AI, because I think, will need AI to decipher life. Just human intelligence won't be enough. But also then with a focus on drug development, gene therapies, neuroprosthetics, and longevity. Who doesn't want to live a long, healthy life? So welcome, Louisa, and maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit more, tell a little bit about how you got to this really cool job, and tell a little bit more about your podcast so others get inspired to check it out.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Katy, and I could not think of a better way to spend my Sunday afternoon in December than being a part of this wonderful event and talking about science and science podcasting. As you introduced, I'm a biologist by training, and somewhere around half through my postdoc, I really enjoyed being in academia, but I realized what I really enjoy is writing and talking about science, and not so much standing in the lab and doing data analysis. So I switched a little bit from actually doing the science into talking, writing, and analyzing science in a more broader sense. And I do that in a couple of capacities. So I'm a consultant for biotech and pharma. I'm a writer of scientific articles, more popular science, tech commentary types of articles, and I have a podcast. The idea to start the podcast was really, as often happens in science, pure serendipity. So really not any planned project, and especially not planned as a marketing project for myself. But I'm doing the podcast together with my father, who's a lifelong journalist and a podcast producer. And we were sitting at the kitchen table at Christmas, pretty exactly 3 years ago. And we realized I was talking about science for 3.5 hours, and we had like 3 cups of coffee, and we're just chatting about gene therapies. It was also at the outskirts of the pandemic when a lot of this translation was needed, I think, in a more urgent sense, because people realized this things that are happening in laboratories are not just in this ivory tower, but it's something that actually affects my daily life. And I need to know about that in order to continue living my life. So we talked and then we thought, maybe we just produce like 1 or 2 podcast episodes and see where this leads. And now this is 3 years ago. And 42 episodes later, we're still running. And I really, really enjoy it because what I said in the beginning, I really just love talking about science. And this, I think it's really, for me, not so much that I have this urge to educate people, but I'm just very excited about many, many scientific topics, almost any scientific topics, because there is so much cool research going on. And I think having an understanding not only what that means for the research that's in the laboratories and maybe the boardrooms of a biotech, but also for society and maybe for humanity itself. Because I think, and this is why it's called the BioRevolution podcast, there is this idea and concept that we are now, after the Industrial Revolution and then the digital revolution, we're now at the stage of the BioRevolution, where we're actually have learned enough about human biology and maybe have access to tools like gene editing, like Katy, you mentioned, artificial intelligence, like neuroprosthetics, all these things to actually maybe hack our biology, change our biology fundamentally. And this is something that is not as far away as one might think. This is something that's already happening. We're having CRISPR therapies. We had the first highly personalized CRISPR therapy in an infant in a hospital in Philadelphia this year that saved this baby's life. We're seeing a lot of these things that are really shaping human biology, and not only human biology, but also the biology of many animals, plants, microbes on this planet, really to our needs, but in a kind of engineering sense. And I think this is what I find so fascinating, this intersection between having these revolutionary technologies that can be used for the good of humanity and the planet, but can also have quite a doom potential if they're used in the wrong way, if they're not used carefully, unethically. And this is what we're trying in the podcast also to always factor in. So it's not only technology optimism, it's not only excitement about science, but it's also what could this really mean for humanity as a whole, for society, or for a human life. One example, of course, is the longevity topic, which I think through a couple of very rich individuals investing very heavily in this field is top of mind for many people. And the question, what would it actually mean to live 50 years longer, not only in the sense of what would it mean biologically, but what would it mean for a life of work, for partnership, for playing professional sports, all these kind of questions. So I think this is something, there is endless potential for discussion. So for me, finding topics and speakers has so far not been a problem. It's more like fitting everything in a proper timing, because of course this is something that I do next to many other things. So there's not always time to spend endless amount of hours on this. But I think I come across interesting topics as soon as I open LinkedIn or as soon as I just connect with anyone on a conference. And I think there are so many interesting people that I meet and so many cool speakers or guests that we have lined up, that this is really something that so far has been a very natural trajectory to just come across interesting topics and individuals to talk to. And I think maybe one of the challenges, and Katy, you mentioned that in the introduction, is that, of course, we want to bridge the curious individual who doesn't have a science background, the people who come from industry and more are interested really in trends and what could that mean for my biotech, and the researchers who are in the lab and of course have this really intense depth into a topic. And for all of those people, it should still be interesting. So sometimes it's really a stretch to try to keep it at a level that it can be interesting to a layman or to a scientist from a completely different field. But at the same time, of course, being deep enough in the science that we don't lose the scientific depth that I think is needed to explain these complex contexts. And maybe we can just quickly move to the next slide, but I think this is basically what I already introduced about the podcast. If you are interested, the QR codes lead to Spotify and YouTube. We actually started a little experiment to also have video podcasts since this year, which I think is going pretty okay. It's also a little challenge because you need to not only think about what you're saying, but also how you look while saying it. But I think it's going pretty okay. And I think from the topics that we span, I think there is something that can be really interesting for many people, even though it might not be the direct field of research, direct field of expertise, because the way we frame it and the way we try to end our episodes will always link it back to an impact that it has on society. For example, we had in the last episode, we discussed a tool that is an AI-based image recognition system for discovering or for predicting genetic diagnosis of rare diseases. So 40% of rare diseases have a genetic component that can be, or 80% have a genetic component, but for 40% of those, they're actually distinct facial features. And this is something that physicians naturally recognize, but that also AI can recognize actually pretty well and make a suggestion which could be the gene that's involved, and based on that predict or help finding a diagnosis, which otherwise can take 5-10 years, which is really burdensome on the families and the patients. That said, there is also, again, the other, the angle that it might actually be used for something harmful, and to think about a little bit what the societal impact or the impact on humanity of such a technology could be. Actually, this year there was a paper out from a Chinese group that showed the opposite, the reconstruction of facial features from a small piece of DNA that was actually pretty good. Which, of course, when we think about law enforcement, when we think about privacy, when we think about all these things that could be done with just spitting out a chewing gum in the wrong place at the wrong time and having your facial features reconstructed, leaves open a lot of room for discussion. And I think the intersection of these topics always ends up a little bit on where I can see like a sci-fi thriller, maybe Michael Crichton type of thing happening. And this is what I find really exciting about discussing these topics. So I really hope to continue this for a long time. And I think as science moves so fast, I'm not worried of running out of topics with this. And with that, I would maybe hand over to the next.
Louise, thanks so much. And I think there are a lot of sci-fi stories in what is happening right now. Absolutely. And I hope somebody picks it up, because that is yet another step of translation. We just saw Anna Maria Thales's movie on the fungi kingdom. It was just a fascinating whirlwind through what fungi have done for us. And not just recently, but throughout the history of the earth. And I think that just reaches even broader audiences. So it's now my distinct pleasure to introduce Allissa Dillman. We have met in person. She is a superpower. She is an amazing force of nature. Also, when you ever encounter her in real life, she is the founder of BioData Sage LLC. And she is using that LLC to revolutionize the landscape of data science integration in biomedical and biological science. She is a driving force in the common data ecosystem environment that NIH has created to explore and synergize across the many common fund projects. HubMap, the Human Biomolecular Project that I'm part of, but also SENNET, the study of senescent cells, which are relevant for aging, and 12 other projects. They're all part of the Common Fund project, and there are new ones coming in and old ones phasing out. And all of these projects creating amazing data sets, which ideally are more than the sum of parts together. And it's non-trivial to then have a portal for this CFDE data ecosystem, but then also to have new ways to analyze and visualize and model that data. And in order to make that all happen, there is this series of podcasts now where different researchers get to present on the CFDE data ecosystem, and I think we will hear about that. But Allissa, please feel free to also explain some of your other adventures and contributions. It's just super cool to see what you were able to do there. So I will leave the bio up here, but I will give it over to you, Allissa, in the interest of time. So please tell us more about how you got this really cool job, how you pick your podcast partners and also those which you interview, and then ultimately, why are you doing all of this?
Yeah, sure. So I'm really excited to be here, and hopefully my 7-year-old is entertained enough for the hour that we will not hear him singing some crazy songs. But yeah, so my background is originally, I have a PhD in computational neuroscience. So I've been in the bioinformatics world for quite some time. But actually, even before that, in undergrad, I used to do community science. So we were part of the chemistry club, and we would do like science magic shows, and we would go into the elementary school and do like hands-on science activities. And so like I've always really loved doing community science engagement, and it's been a thing that I sort of did on the side for a long time. And then during my postdoc, I had started to be part of a lot of like hackathons and training and other kinds of things on the NIH campus, where we were really trying to help each other like build more technical skills, because we were really starting to feel like, all right, we really think that everybody should have at least a little bit of these technical skills, right? Like even if you want to be a bench biologist, kind of just appreciating more about how, data structures work and a little bit of coding, kind of just get us all a little bit more technically savvy. So we started kind of like running these like impromptu training programs, like I said, participating hackathons, and it ended up being kind of this community thing. And NCBI, which kind of is the home of a lot of the genomics data, sort of noticed that I was always doing this thing, and they were like, would you like a job doing this thing? And to be fair, I had realized that academia maybe wasn't quite the right fit for me by that point, because I just was really passionate about, this community engagement and training and upskilling and like sort of weaving technical skills into really interesting places. But I didn't really know what to do with that. And so this was really serendipitous that they were like, yeah, have a job in training and engagement. And I was like, that sounds amazing. Let's do that. So I worked there for 2 years doing a lot of hackathons and outreach and, training and workshops and conferences and all sorts of fun things. And it was really a blast. And sort of like moved my way around NIH until I ended up in the office of the director in the Office of Data Science Strategy, where we ran both a bunch of like internal training programs. We also ran nationwide training programs and having scientists come to NIH with a lot of technical skills and kind of like share those technical skills and tools and vice versa, getting more of our data and our tools out to people who already have technical skills. So it was really like this nice give and take. And I really loved the aspect of kind of being the boots on the ground. But as my job kind of moved further and further away from boots on the ground and more administrative things, I sort of decided that wasn't a good fit. So I left NIH to create my own LLC. Biodata Sage. And so I've been running my company for the last 3 years. And the really great thing about that is I get to be part of projects that are very close to my heart, things that are all around training and engagement and hackathons and workshops and unconferences and, all sorts of different ways of, giving people more technical skills and even just like data literacy skills. And so when this opportunity came out around the Common Fund data ecosystem, they were looking for a training center. And I was really excited because, omics, this bioinformatics, biomedical data science, like has been something I've already been doing for a really long time. So it was really intriguing to really help build this whole training, infrastructure around like all of these different programs, because there's over 20 odd different programs that are part of the Common Fund data ecosystem. And that's everything from, like, as you mentioned, Katy, like aging to, normal human development and rare disease and, childhood cancers and just like everything in between. So it really is this amazing space with expertise across so much. There's like voice in AI. So you get to be part of this massive ecosystem, and you get to work with experts on everything from like bioethics to AI to, clinical specialists. And so when we got the training center award, it's been a blast. And when we were kind of thinking about what sorts of things should we do as a training center, what kinds of ways can we sort of engage with broader communities, it was an external request. It was somebody else from CFDE that kind of threw out the idea, like, hey, would you consider doing a podcast? And I admit the really embarrassing thing is I had never actually listened to a podcast. I definitely am more of a music person. I'll listen to music when I'm driving or music when I'm working out. And I was not really, and I more read things versus doing podcasts, which is funny because I am very auditory. So I was like, well, this is intriguing, but now I need to go do some homework and start listening to podcasts. So I listen to a plethora of podcasts, everything from like music podcasts to science podcasts to tech podcasts, to kind of be like, all right, what kind of style do we want? How do we want to play with this? Where do we want to go with this? And just trying to get a sense of like where we wanted our aim to be. At the end of the day, we do kind of have, sort of some certain goals that NIH also kind of like asks for us to complete as well. So they really want to make sure that we are reaching a broad audience, but also like that we're really getting, more folks out there to know like what's possible in CFDE. Like, so our big goal for the podcast is like, here are all of the cool things that are possible. Here are all the cool things that are happening. Here's all of the data, the resources, the tools, like all of these things that you can go and play with. So that's kind of like sort of one of our main goals of the podcast, is just kind of like to get, all of these amazing resources out to, more folks. And I will say though, so we're not necessarily as focused on the complete layperson right now. We are a little more focused on researchers that already have some background, but like don't know about what CFD is or what it has to offer. I do think that we will sort of slowly move more towards making sure that there are some podcasts that are also like a little more further back in that track and are a little more lay audience focused. But I must admit right now, I think we've got a little more of like a researcher focus. But yeah, so, and like I said, the reason why we really latched onto this idea of a podcast when it was kind of thrown out in all of our brainstorming suggestions is there is still a lot to demystify in omics research. So omics includes, transcriptomics, so RNA, genomics, DNA, genetics, proteomics, so all the proteins and things that they do. That there is these are big data, right? Even if you have a small data set, you are measuring potentially hundreds of thousands of things in a single experiment. So it's just sort of like helping to understand, first of all, like what that looks like from a data point of view, because it starts to get really squirrely when you're kind of handling all of this data, even from just a computational perspective, right? Like these kinds of data sets are things that, are no longer things you can kind of easily do on like a laptop. So kind of looking at what that looks like from a computer point of view, but also, what that looks like in terms of what you can do with all of that data. What is the power of all of that data? Like, what is the output of all of that data? So, making this massive, 20 odd program, hundreds of thousands of data sets and all that stuff, like making that a little more approachable and useful to researchers to kind of have them hopefully have these aha moments about like, oh, like I didn't even think about, I could do this with the data, or I could ask this question, or these questions I'm already interested in, potentially have places I can go and answer those questions. But also we're really hoping to kind of democratize, scientific knowledge more. So right now, we don't want to just kind of like have the people within the ecosystem, know about each other, but we really want the wider scientific audience, and the wider, not just scientific, but like, medical librarians and things like that. People who play with data, who have access to data and who share resources at universities, to know about these resources, to know about these open tools, and hopefully kind of, further democratize that research. But also it's just really fun to feature really diverse scientific voices. So our one stipulation is it has to kind of be obviously somehow related to CFDE, but that's a pretty broad net. So we get to kind of highlight all sorts of different aspects of things. So we've done everything from kind of talking about reproducibility and elements of style and what that means. We've talked about knowledge graphs, so these, visual representations of really complex data. We've talked about how you can use voice data as biomarkers for disease. We've actually recently started to also do visual podcasts. So we were very fortunate to have Andy come and do a VR podcast with us, which I think may even be up now, if not in the next couple of days. So we've been kind of playing with the visual podcast as well. So we've done VR and biomedicine. We've talked a lot about FAIR principles, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and how that kind of like spans across all of these different complex data sets and data types. And we've even talked a little bit about like the metaphor for the ecosystem itself, because, this ecosystem, the Common Fund data ecosystem is quite complex because you've got all these programs that are funded, but you also have all of these like centers that are funded. You have these, groups of people that are doing projects. You have data, you have tools, you have like all of the, so you got the people, the tools, the data, all these different complex things. So we at the training center have also been thinking about like, what is the best way to kind of just even describe this, like describing the program itself. So like we've kind of had a really nerdy discussion in one of our podcasts about like just like the metaphor of an ecosystem and why it fits, our project. And typically like we try and pick speakers and topics that either are going to highlight a new scientific publication within the CFDE or with CFDE data. We also try to address community training needs. So we know that there is a big need and interest in some of these newer ways to analyze data, such as knowledge graphs. Those are still kind of quite new in the space. So kind of talking about, how you use them and the tools for them. We also try to clarify important concepts and methodologies. So like I said, we've really discussed things like reproducibility and FAIR a lot because that's really, really necessary in this space. So we've had some fun podcasts around that. We've also tried to really illustrate like new tools, resources, and technologies. So, when folks in CFDE have kind of built a new tool or are building new resources, we try and have them on and kind of talk through what that looks like, how researchers can use it, why they're interested, how they can, get more involved. And we also try and make sure that we are sort of tapping into like future perspectives and like, where programs are going next, what they're interested in and, where we're all going like as a cohesive ecosystem as well. And And so, yeah, we really do like, we kind of like, you know, we within CFDE, we have quite a few like group meetings where we all come together. So that's one place where we really look for potential podcast interviewees. It's really nice because we do kind of come together twice a year and then we kind of present where we're up to with things. So that makes our job a lot easier because we can be like, oh, that was a really cool presentation, or that was a cool poster, or like that was really cool work. We should talk to them more on that. That sounds really fun. And as I mentioned, we recently did a this visual podcast, and that was only possible because we had already were coming together for a meeting. And so we actually kind of tacked on our visual podcast as part of that meeting. So that made that a lot more straightforward because normally we're not necessarily located in the same place. Like these programs span all over the country. So these like, you know, the two meetings we have in a year kind of helps facilitate that. We also have like a newsletter. So we kind of, you know, throw out to the community as a reminder, we're here, we want to talk to you about things. But we also put out calls like on LinkedIn. We also kind of interact with a bunch of different kind of communities, like the life science trainer communities and some other communities where we sort of are like, you know, if you got a cool new thing you want to come and talk to us about, you know, come chat. And also, you know, keep our eye on publications. So if something comes out that we spot that's been using CFD data, we can be like, okay, this looks like something really cool. Let's see if they want to come chat with us. We also have, you know, NIH sometimes comes and they're like, oh, we like talk to this person and we think they'd be really cool for a podcast. So it's quite nice because again, I'm very new to podcasting. So it's been really helpful to already have this like really, really broad ecosystem full of amazing, brilliant people doing amazing, brilliant things. So it makes my job really easy. I feel like we have the opposite problem so we do it monthly and we're like, oh man, like we already have the whole year booked up. So we have like it's a good problem to have. And I love talking about science. So I'm always so excited. I could talk about just about any kind of science. So, like, I really do feel like we have the opposite problem of like, okay, we gotta make sure that we are not over committing to like too many things. Cause this is not the only thing we do at the training center. We also do workshops and hackathons and are building a whole e-learning dashboard. And so we're building asynchronous trainings, you know, and a bunch of other things. So we definitely have to make sure we're focusing on all these other aspects, not just the podcasts.
Allissa, thank you so very much. I think it's really great to have both of you because, Allissa, from what I understand, you're more on the technical side, right? How to deliver fair data, how to cross-search it, how to get it wrapped up in a knowledge graph. We had earlier a presentation by Adam Bly. He works on system.com, and that's just a phenomenal ambition to get all the relevant biomedical knowledge into a knowledge graph and makes that knowledge graph available to the general larger research community. And then Louise, I think, if I may say so, you pick more the new breakthrough developments, and then you try to help us understand what that actually means, right? If we live 50 years longer, what does this really, really mean? Or if we now can use CRISPR to save a baby's life, which of course is magic and really deeply appreciated by all that are connected to that baby. I can't imagine how much that must have meant for the parents also. So what, however, does this mean? And then there are other ways to then use the same technology to kind of reconstruct faces for those which just recently joined. So I think it's interesting to have on one side a podcast that interviews the lead authors, which always there is supposed to be a lead author for a paper or multiple, or a lead project lead, and those oftentimes get interviewed because they were able to ignite the ideas and to get the funding and to ultimately get us results that can be used. But then Allissa, on the other hand, is dealing with big science in the biomedical sciences. So each one of the Common Fund projects has 350 plus researchers. They all work together for typically 4 years, 5 years of a pilot project, and then another 4 or 5 years together in a production phase environment. And then they all come together via the Common Fund data ecosystems, or 12 plus of them, and they try to see what can be done if we now combine our forces, combine our data, our algorithms, our knowledge graphs. What can be done then? And so I think it's very complementary of where you're coming from, and it's super exciting also to have both covered and to have the kind of ivory towers in the field interviewed, but also to have opportunities for junior career researchers to present what they were able to do in such a huge consortium, right? What does it mean if you are also number 200 in a set of 500? And you want to do your PhD or your postdoc or your tenure in such an environment? How do you do that, right? This is non-trivial to understand and manage. And so it's super cool to have both of you here. I was wondering if you could help us understand what surprised you. So you came into this just being excited and in awe of what science can do for all of us, and having an interest to communicate this to many. And I think you're doing fabulous. But what was most surprising to you in the journey you had so far? And it might be something that you didn't expect would happen. It was a good thing, or it was a challenge that you didn't anticipate but overcame, or are still working through. I'm just curious, because oftentimes life is not totally predictable. Things happen and you just, you didn't expect that. And it, again, can be something really cool that you might like to share, or something that's really an open question.
Maybe I start, Allissa, is that okay? Yeah, I think two things that surprised me is, or maybe one thing, I think you learn a lot about yourself when you do a podcast. And I think, coming from a scientific background and also doing always very research intense projects, I put in the first episodes a mini PhD in each of them, because I was very nervous about making I needed to know everything. And I was surprised how much easier it gets and how much more confident one becomes also in interviewing guests, which I think is really great. And I think this is the surprise is more that this actually penetrates into the rest of life, that the podcast actually gives you some tools that I realized also for many other things, even for personal conversations. I think it teaches you to listen a bit better, because I was speaking over my guests in the beginning quite a lot, and I learned to not do that. And this was actually quite interesting, how much this monthly experience and the work that you put into it, and also the editing that one then gets and learns about which pieces of what one says or how one intervenes, for example, are being cut out. It's actually quite interesting what it teaches you about having conversations in general and trying to be a good listener. The other thing that I don't know if it was a surprise, but I think something that's maybe more of a challenge is, especially, so we're interviewing a lot of scientists who are very deep in their topic. And I think this is probably very different for Alyssa's podcast, but for ours, sometimes we need to rein them back a little bit to not get too technical, even though it would be very nice. But I think we're aiming for being understandable for a broader audience. And this is something that sometimes is surprisingly difficult to try to get people. So I try to work with metaphors a lot, but sometimes it just gets very deep into supplemental figure 2a and the standard deviation, and then we're in a range where I know that, as you said, like explaining it to my mother or someone would not understand it anymore, and then you need to somehow bridge that, and that is not always as easy as one might hope.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I've been teaching for a really long time, over 15 years. And so part of me was thinking like, oh, okay, this will be, kind of not similar, but like I feel like, because a podcast is about kind of like, learning something new. So it's like maybe this will be similar. I think the most surprising thing was really trying to find a good balance with my interviewees on their kind of scripted comfort versus like letting things breathe and being a little more not scripted. A lot of the people we talk to are very much used to doing like a webinar, right? So like let me tell you about my work with slides for 30 minutes. And so this format of like, let's just have a chat, but it is recorded and it will be public is sort of, it's an interesting thing that a lot of scientists are not used to doing. So finding that balance, finding that happy medium. When I first started, I felt like I gave too many scripted, like potential scripted prompts. And then we didn't have a conversation. They would just kind of like answer all of the prompts and just keep talking. And I was like, oh no, we slightly missed the mark. So kind of learning that balance of like, all right, how do I help my guests feel comfortable, feel confident, feel like they're, not going to be blindsided, right? Because again, this is just a very different form of communication that researchers are not used to. So how do I help them feel comfortable and confident? But also, how do we make this feel like a casual conversation? So like that balance, it turns out like is definitely not necessarily like super straightforward. And it turns out it also changes like depending on the person that you are going to be interviewing. Like some people do kind of naturally fall into it a little more. Others, I'm finding that I need to kind of like approach it with different styles and kind of, use different things to get people to kind of like feel what that groove should be. So most of the surprising bits have just been like, just how fun and complicated and interesting humans are, but also like I think specifically scientists have been taught to communicate their work in a very specific way, and sort of like helping them work around that has been a lot of fun. But I really, I don't know, maybe this is tooting my own horn a little bit, but I really feel like this is such a useful skill to have. So I've been encouraging more people to come on because I'm like, this will really help you kind of like, it's like a chalk talk, but it's not for like other researchers that already know your work. So it's really meant to be like, how could you have a casual conversation, right? That elevator pitch, like thinking about how to communicate your work in those terms and like actually having practice at it. So it's been really fun in that way, but it's certainly not what I originally intended. That like it would be almost like these little mini like SciComm workshops to like prep us for the podcasts.
Yeah, super interesting. And of course, we have the same issue with the 24-hour event, right? We would like to have conversations, to have people go beyond what they can do in a scientific paper, to bring in emotions which they are not supposed to bring in their normal scholarly work. And it's not always happening. But then there are some surprises also there where colleagues, which I thought they were more on the theory and no fun side, they out of nowhere turn out to be the entertainers, and they really take on that opportunity to bring in gadgets, to bring in a demo, a tour of their lab, to really make it super entertaining, and I didn't expect it. And so I think it's not always knowable what people can do. And I think we all should try out to go into Science Museum and to envision our work in that kind of environment where you have rockets, like in the New York Hall of Science, you have these amazing rockets in the front of the building. And of course, they are cool. And many of us are really into space, and many of the children that arrive there and many school buses, they are totally into this. And then there might be cute, fuzzy, furry animals right on the other side. And then in the middle is data visualization. So how do you get people to come to your data visualization when there is so much other cool stuff going on, right? Which is loud and cute and different from what they might see in a normal environment in their textbooks at school. So I think they are looking for other experiences and more hands-on experiences and things that they don't get to see in school. And then, well, there is a data visualization. So again, how do you get them to come over? And how do we keep their attention for long enough so that they get wrapped into the beauty, if you're an artist, to get them wrapped into the data so that they see themselves in the data, to get them to start exploring these data visualizations? Totally not easy to do this. And while I'm at data visualizations, I wonder how do you actually do an audio podcast, which both of you have done, and still bring up figures which are critical in biomedical research, but maybe also data visualizations, which also oftentimes help you understand trends and patterns and outliers. How do you do this? Do you provide a verbal description of these visualizations, or do you make them available later? Or how do you go about including visuals?
So for us, it's both. We do try to kind of describe things, but I think for our podcast, we also try to make it more focused on the conceptual points rather than like the specific figures and kind of like what the take-home messages are. As I mentioned, we did an audio podcast on knowledge graphs, which is literally visual representation of data. But we sort of kept it around kind of the concepts of things and you know, how those apply and like the concepts of the analysis and things like that. So we didn't necessarily get too deep into the weeds of things, but we did also link the publication and have like kind of a description there. So we kind of tend to stay more on that conceptual, or like, as actually Louise mentioned, we like to do metaphor. I love metaphors. So if I can try to find a way to link like a metaphor to a visual representation when I can, that's also super helpful. But like you're absolutely right. Sometimes there are things that really do need visuals. So we can link those in the podcast.
Yeah, we do the same. I mean, we also the video podcast is still like talking heads, so we're not cutting in little snippets of data. I was thinking about it, but I think I would like to have the podcast audio digestible. So I would like to have it not that you have to view it, so you can just listen to it, because I think this is the format that it's meant for. But I usually have we have a long publication list with in the references in the section for people to look at, and sometimes also highlight, okay, this is what we talked about here. You can follow up on the publication. And as you said, Allissa, we also stay more on a conceptual level and more, I mean, also since we have also a non-scientific audience, more go into the key numbers, or also explain, for example, like how difficult to digest, for example, a big hairball of interaction network might be, but don't really go too deep into the explanation of what the individual nodes might mean, for example. So it's more a little bit on a meta level of what the visualization means. But it's one of the really challenging points, because I mean, science is very visual, right? We're used to seeing the PDF, seeing the data, knowing what it means, also knowing that a difference is only meaningful if the standard deviations don't overlap, all these kinds of things. And this is not so easy to bring across without showing the images. But I also have to say, again, this is something where one can learn a lot. And I think also where, as you say, I mean, for the guests, it's actually quite helpful. So I also work as a keynote speaker and coach others for keynotes. And I think it's a good idea to always be aware that the slides might fail, and to be prepared to present audio only, and maybe potentially also prepare a presentation that is meant as audio only, and then all the visuals are only helpful. Because I think like that you have the chance to bring across the concepts more clearly to your audience. And if you want them to read the slides while listening to you, the chance of losing your audience is much higher, I would say. So I think there is also a big challenge, but also a big payoff in there if you can pull it off. But it's also work to get it right, I have to say.
I will also add, we sort of, we're very lucky, since we are meant to be this, holistic training center. So the other thing we've been working towards is kind of breaking down things like our podcasts, and kind of the end goal will be to kind of integrate it with like actual training modules. So that way you can be like, oh, like listen to this thing, kind of get the overall basic concepts and get excited about like how it applies to this scientific question, and then take this training module on, let's say, knowledge graphs, right? So listen to this cool podcast, listen to this publication, and now take this little training module on what a knowledge graph actually is, and let's break it down and things like that. So like our big goal for this year is to actually integrate our podcasts more into our overall like training platform.
I think that's really genius, because you get people excited about something, right? And then you tell them, hey, if you want to try it out, go over here, you can play with it, have fun for a while, and make it easy for them to have a low floor and a high ceiling potentially, so that they can really use it in their research if they want it. But they can also do a lot of really cool stuff and potentially even abuse it for totally different purposes. We have this cell distance explorer, which now gets used for all kinds of distance analysis. Doesn't have to be cells in relation to vasculature. It can be items to anything, right? It's just XY positions in a label. So I think it's super if you can funnel all that excitement into something. I found it interesting that Louise is also a keynote speaker coach, because I think many researchers really didn't have the luxury to have this kind of coaching in their lives. They would much benefit from it. And in some cases, it's just, I don't know, makeup. We had a TEDx event here. Actually, we have annual TEDx events, and there is an entire crew of local people living in Bloomington here, and just making sure that whoever gets picked to present on the TEDx stage, that they know how to dress, how to get the makeup done, how to act on a humongous stage. Many of us have never been on a big theater stage, and try to fill that with life and with energy and non-trivial. And then, of course, the pitches or the presentations are not long, so you really have to use every word wisely, and also present it so that there's an arc in it, etc. So I wonder if you have guidances for the interviewers you have on your podcasts of what they should and should not be doing, that could be valuable for anyone who is watching here. We are trying to scale up science communication for everyone, because I think we all benefit if we know what is known to us, and the more we know, the more we can reap the benefits of more than the sum of parts, right? So I wonder again, do you have general guidance for people that get invited to a podcast, and maybe that particular podcast doesn't have the guidance, but they can always come here and get your guidance?
Yeah, I think, Allissa already alluded to it. I think show yourself. I think this is the most important part for both podcast and a keynote, which is not a scientific paper where the data has to speak for itself, because the data will not tell your story. You have to tell your story, and you have to be the protagonist of your story, which means that you have to be visible at least a little bit. And this is something I think that scientists who have been told that the data will tell their story for them struggle with, and being out there, allowing yourself to shine through as a person with little anecdotes, also talking maybe about this. I think for anyone who has ever worked in laboratory or analyzed a big data set, we know that it can be a big struggle, right? This is not a walk in the park for most scientists. There's a lot of pain involved, which gets a positive gain. But I think having parts of this humanity shine through, of what it actually means to get there, what it means to you personally. Is there a personal quest? Because I think this is also true for most scientists, right? That this is not a coincidence, but it's more something that they really care about deeply. And I think this is something that resonates with the audience. The audience wants to listen to a person, be it in a keynote or in a podcast, and this person is kind of the story, is the vehicle for learning about the data, learning about the technology. And I think this is really just daring to do it and being true to yourself, being authentic about it, because I think some people get coaching maybe from, marketing agencies, and become very loud and out there, and this doesn't work. I think it has to come from inside, and I think you can be very personable and be a very good keynote speaker even though you're shy. And there are even people who are standing in the middle of the stage and they're still commanding the stage. So I think there's different ways to do it, but I think one has to show the authentic self and not only the data in order to engage the audience. And this is something that I advise my guests to do, and that I also advise when I give when I coach on keynotes. I think for the podcast, I mean, the benefit is, of course, having the guidance through the questions. So then the guests, they are in a more, let's say, relaxed position, that they don't have to make up the structure of it, because that is something that will be provided by the hosts. But on stage, it's also a good idea to have a narrative structure and not just present random events, but have some tension that should flow like a natural story.
I will say, so I do not give advice for keynote speakers or anything like that, but I do a lot of student career talks. And the two big things I always say to students is have hobbies outside of science. I think something that has really been a benefit to the kind of work I do is that I did things like theater. I'm in a rock band. I have to do performance like for, those things. And you have kind of different personas for those different things. And if you have these hobbies, then that means it's easier to bring your kind of authentic self to other places too. But it also means you have practice with stage presence, right? Theater or music or anything that has a performance aspect to it is still great practice. Even for a scientific talk, yes, you are doing something slightly different, but the ease of comfort on the stage, the ease of presence, the way to move in the public eye, feeling comfortable doing that. If you have a hobby where you get to practice that in a non-scientific way, it's still really, really helpful. And as Louise said, you also get to bring more of your authentic self because you have these things that you do outside of work. And the other piece of advice I give is a lot of students are like, well, which technology should I learn? Which coding language should I learn? Which thing should I learn? And I always sort of focus on, again, something Louise said that was great. In my mind, and maybe this is because I'm biased as a teacher, but in my mind, anybody can learn any technical skill with enough time and a good teacher and good materials. What will make you stand out is, can you tell a story with data? Right? At some point, AI will get better and better at coding, but it will not be good at that human aspect of this is why it matters. This is what these graphs mean and why they matter and what the question is and where we're going and why we're excited about it. That aspect of data storytelling is something that's going to be much more irreplaceable than sort of that. And I'm saying this as somebody who's technical. I'm eventually they'll get better and better at the coding part. But that human aspect of telling a story and why people care, that is such an important skill. And if you have that, you'll really stand out.
And I think stories really hold humanity together. They are great ways to memorize things, to communicate across, to capture things that might be hard to understand otherwise. So in data visualization, we oftentimes now you see scrolly stories where you start with a question and then you introduce the players and the data and why in the world you would go clean all of that data. And then how do you analyze it and what kind of visualizations were created and why and what does this all mean? So you really guide the readers of the data visualizations through this entire process. And oftentimes there are no emotions involved, right? It's just very technical ultimately, but very animated with lots of visuals in there. I also always wonder, when is it okay to engage emotions? Because we absolutely need them to change behavior and sustain behavior. But in what cases is it best to just stay with the objective facts? And I don't know if you have made up your mind on this, and we are running out of time quickly here. But I think ultimately what you can do in the podcast is really get to the humanity. I think that's a good way of phrasing it, to get why we are doing this and how we can do it better together, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that is an extra effort because you now have to talk across scientific boundaries. You have to be heard and communicate across these boundaries. And ultimately, you have to make it relevant to the lives of others so that they understand, oh my God, I just don't just understand, I want to act on it. And so maybe I will end it here so that Lisa can take over the last but not least and final session of this 24-hour event. But Allissa and Louise, thanks again for coming in. Thank you for running these podcasts. I'm looking forward to see more episodes in the future. I hope you also get to connect with each other. I think you might be able to swap speakers also. And I always wonder how you actually could map the space of all these podcasts, right? So we do a lot of data visualization, and I would be super hyper interested to analyze the speakers you had, the speakers you want to have, the speakers that other biomedical podcasts had. So if you have interest in that, please do reach back out to us here.
That sounds really interesting.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. All right.